Well, good. You can be seated. And Deb, thank you. Deb, Pat, that was very nice. Appreciate that. So we're going to begin this morning in Luke chapter 10, but as you're headed over there, let me think of what I want to say here. So, I think it was 5 years, I think it's been 5 years, that we've been with you here at the church, and we had come here to fill in on a Sunday morning. We'd been in Charleston for 22 years, and it felt it was the Lord's time to leave there, and we had been off for about a year, just doing some filling in and that kind of thing. And so we came over here on a Sunday morning to fill in, and then we just kind of began to love you folks, and things worked together, and we've been here since, and I think it's 5 years. So I want you to know that our leaving is certainly nothing that the church has done. I'm not aware of a problem, or there's nothing going on that has driven us to this decision. As far as the church is concerned, it would be in many ways much better if we stayed in a personal sense, because we have grown to love you folks. But we do believe very much, and Emmy and I have independently talked with the Lord a lot about this, and have talked together, and just know that it is the time. It's interesting, in the men's Bible study this morning, Steve Fry was talking about, how did he word that now? A turn of events from the Lord. A turn of events from the Lord. And he talked about how God uses turns of events, and it'll be good to see how the Lord uses this turn of events in our lives and in your life as a church and as individuals. And we're not looking to pastor another church, though not at all. I will probably do some filling in from time to time, but we're not leaving here to try to find another church to pastor. Our plate is pretty full. So with that, I want to thank you for allowing us to be here the time, and you have been very gracious. So I think it was my early 50s. Been pastoring for a lot of years. Been a Christian for many, many years. When the concept, the truth, the principle, the idea, the reality of loving God really took hold of me. And I began to grasp what that really means. And so last week, as you know, you may not remember, but we started a series on Jonah, and my intent was to be in Jonah chapter 2 this morning, but I got captured this week in my own devotions with that term, love the Lord your God. So go to Luke chapter 10, please. In Luke chapter 10, and verse 27, it tells us this. The man answered, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, all your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself." Right, Jesus told him. Go over to Matthew chapter 22. And in verse 37, Jesus replied, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind." And then over in Mark chapter 12 and verse 30, And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. And we say those words often. But it took me years in my own life with God, relationship with God, to come to understand what it is to love God. Because so much of what we do in this Christian life, we talk about serving, we talk about worshiping, we talk about those types of things. But the number one mission in the life of any follower of Jesus Christ is to love God. And the measure of mine and your walk with God, from God's perspective, is not how many times we share the gospel, not how many checks we write to the church, not how many missions trips we go on. It is how deeply we love God. And it is that deep love for God out of which all those other things flow. But the main goal is to love God. Now there's a principle in life, right? Anything passive, anything stationary begins to decay. You have to, so take a look at your own physical body. You have to constantly keep at keeping healthy, right? It's a constant process of watching diet and exercise and all those kind of things. If you don't do that, it slides downhill. Think about your car, right? Yesterday, Emmy and I had our convertible out. It was probably our last time, but we had the top down and went for the day and had a great ride. That convertible is going to sit in the garage for the winter. But I do some things to that during the winter just to make sure that oil keeps circulated and the pistons and stuff are covered with oil and the battery is charged. Because if you don't, if it's left to sit there, it decays in one way or another. Your life with God, if you do not intentionally take steps to keep it alive and vibrant, decays. Passivity is the enemy in the life of a believer. You and I have to take a marriage, right? You have to do constant things to keep a marriage alive and focused. And for Emmy to know that I haven't forgotten about her, that I love her. So this week, I have a weekly, there's a bakery in Dover, you'd be surprised, I kind of like it. And so I allow myself once a week to make a stop there. And I went in and they had some oatmeal molasses bread. They make great bread. And I looked at that and I said, that's got Emmy's name written all over that. So I bought it and took a ride home and said, hey, had this. Do you know why I do that? Because you have to do things on a constant basis to remind each other, right? To keep that flame, that fire going. Because if you don't, if you just come into it passively, if you just let it be, it deteriorates, right? My brother, so it wasn't this weekend, but the weekend before. Boy, I wish I hadn't done that, Francis. I went to that Red Sox game. I think I jinxed them. Since then, they have, oh my goodness. It's painful. But let's talk about good stuff. So I went to, my brother lives in Massachusetts. I only see him a couple of times a year. And to me, the highlight of going to the Red Sox game with my brother is to keep that connection vital. Right? I mean, you can talk on the phone, but it's not the same as eye to eye, shoulder to shoulder, laughing and talking and confiding. And if you don't do those things, relationships between brothers or anybody disintegrates. Passiveness in your life with God means your spiritual life decays. It never stays. So this idea of loving God is a pursuit. Love is a very active thing. When Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your strength and all your mind, it's every part of you and I. So our mind means that I think about God and I study about God, because if I love God, I want to know everything about Him. I'll tell you something that ticks me off about myself. I try to know everything I can about Emmy, right? And one thing I cannot figure out for the life of me is what she puts on hamburgers. Every time I think that, something just fell. Every time I think I have that, I'll bring a hamburger home and I've put the wrong stuff on it. Someday, probably not at this point, I'll never get that. But when you love somebody, you study the things because you want to know every detail about them. Every aspect of their life, even before you met them, becomes important. You want to know. So you study the Word about God. Not because you have to. Not because God will bless you if you do. But because you love God. And you want to know more about God Himself. Himself. Then you think about the heart of the affections. The heart of the emotions. So there is to be this affectionate heart that you have for God. Right? It's like yesterday I was with most of my grandkids, and your heart just kind of overflows with this emotion that we call affection. Right? And you're just so, you can't put into words how happy, just to see it, to hear them, to be around them. That emotion of affection is the heart that we're to have to God. To God. And then you think about strength. So the physical energy that I have, I'm to use in my love for God. So Jesus said, if you give a cup of water to someone in my name, that's that sense of, I'm doing this because I love God. Not because it's what God expects me to do, not because people will think I'm a great guy if I do it, but I can do this physical action, whatever it is, because I love God. But it's more than that. Singing is a physical action, isn't it? And sometimes the greatest times I have with God is when I'm by myself in the car singing a song that I made up the words for, and it's great. If you heard it, you'd all want the CD or something. Not really. But those are extraordinary times between me and God. And if you did listen in, you'd think I was insane. But see, loving God, and then it talks about the spirit. And so your spirit, your soul, is that part of you that is really hard to understand, but it's the eternal part that seeks to worship, and we're to worship one. And we are made to connect with one, and that's God. So, the idea, the main mission. Now in 1 Peter chapter 1, there's an interesting phrase. Truth. 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 8. You love him, even though you have never seen him. You love him. Have you ever wondered why we don't have any solid evidence of what Jesus looked like? I mean, we do of many people of his day, even of David before his day, for example, of King David. There's some pretty solid evidence of what David looked like. But there isn't of Jesus. We all have seen pictures of artist renditions. And it's interesting when you look around the world, depending upon the culture, that person that the artist depicts is different depending on the cultural aspect. Which should be because we don't have, and it's because, I think, God wants us to love Christ, to love him because of who he is. Not because we look at him and say, oh, he's a rock star, or, oh, he's, worth following. We really don't know what God looks like, right? I mean, you read the Bible and you try to get a picture of it, and at times it seems as though God, certainly spoken of as having a body, the earth is his footstool and so forth. But then other times he's spirit, and you think about the times when Moses sees the backside of him. And I always say, I wonder what God's like. And there are some artist depictions of what God might be like. But we don't know at all. Because being human, if God wants us to love him based on who he is, his character, his power, his love that he extends to us. Not because we look at him and say, yeah, I like what God looks like. Or yeah, Jesus looks okay to me or something. So Peter says, you love God even though you've never seen him. Then he says, you trust God even though you've never seen him. So in Psalm 42:1, so I talked about this idea of passiveness. And that to walk with God is an adventure. It's a pursuit. And you never reach the limit of where you've done growing in loving God. You never do. You never reach the point, if you're walking with God, where you've learned everything you want to know about him. Because God is far too big for that. But it becomes a pursuit that is so strong that David likens it to this: as the deer pants for streams of water, so I long for you. So we get to sometimes read that and we get the idea, you can picture a stream of water gently flowing through a field or something, and the deer are coming there and taking drinks. But this is a deer who is desperately seeking for water, is panting, needs to find water. And David says, I long for you with that same pursuit. That's what David's talking about. That's the mission of a believer. Is it any wonder when you look at the life of David? It was a train wreck. So you have to look at it and say, what was it that God found so extraordinary that he could say, David, you are a man after my own heart. What is it? And it is right here, is this pursuit, this longing that David had for God himself. Now, love means that someone has captured your affections and your will and your energy. Right? That's what love means. In the biblical sense, there are really four primary definitions of love. We usually think of the term agape or agapeo, which means a self-sacrificial love. And it's the love that Christ had when he came to the cross. It's a love that the Father had when he sent his Son to the cross for you and I. It's a love that you can have for someone else when you sacrifice your own well-being or your own good on behalf of someone else. But that's not the love Jesus is talking about. He's not talking about that kind of self-sacrificial love. There's a place for that. And we want to thank God for it. But this is different. This is the filial kind of love. In fact, the commentaries say the use of filial. So you remember Peter was a follower of Christ, a disciple, denied Jesus the night of the crucifixion when Jesus is arrested, denies him. Jesus dies, resurrected. Later meets Peter on the seashore, cooks breakfast, says, Peter, let's you and I talk. And Jesus asked him 3 times, do you love me? And the term that Jesus used is what he's talking about. The use of filio in Peter's answers. And the Lord's third question conveys the thought of cherishing the object above all else, of manifesting an affection characterized by constancy from the modest of the highest veneration. It is distinguished from agapeo in this, that filio more nearly represents tender affection. Philia is the primary term the Bible uses to describe the love that God has for the Son and for his sons and daughters. Philia. So we think, we're going to celebrate communion in just a minute. We're going to think about the cross. The agape love of Christ, of the Father, of the Spirit on display at the cross. But also the filial love. It's not a cold, sacrificial duty that sent Christ to the cross. It was an affection for you that sent Christ to the cross. And so often when we think about loving God, we think about him in the terms of, it means that I do my duty. But folks, duty isn't the same as love. I'm going to go to work tomorrow morning. A lot of you are going to go to work tomorrow morning. Not every Monday morning do I feel like walking through those doors. Mondays are Mondays, no matter where you work, right? You do it because it's duty. You do it. And some days I'm glad to walk through those doors, and other days I sit in my car and say, oh, brother, here we go. Right? That's human. Duty is not love. Worship is not love. You can worship God because you like that emotional high. You can worship God because you feel that it's something that you have to do. You're commanded to do it. It's not the same. Serving is not the same as love. And I'm afraid that there's going to be a lot of folks who will live this Christian life, and I think they'll go to heaven. I'm not suggesting that. We're going to get there and realize that you miss the greatest part of what it is to know Christ. Because it's not duty, it's not worship, and it's not serving. It is love being God. Love. Love. That. When you love God. I remember when Emmy and I were young, we literally had no money, as many young people. And our parents, at least my parents, said, you're kind of young to get married, maybe you ought to work a little bit, get some money saved up and those kind of things. And our thinking was, doesn't matter if we had nothing, we got each other, right? Believe that. I believe that now. Wouldn't matter if we lost the color TV. We would still have each other. Folks, loving God is the key, the focus, the mission. And when people say, I have lost everything for Christ, and they thank God for it, it's because they have come to know that loving God is greater than anything you could possibly have. Loving God. We're going to be in Hebrews tonight. We're in Hebrews chapter 10 still. And in Hebrews chapter 10, Paul writes to them and says, you've lost everything, many of you. You've lost everything, but you still follow Christ. Because there is something that so grabs a hold of your heart, your affections, the deepest stirring, the deepest part of who you are for God that is greater than anything else on earth. That's what it means to walk with God. That's what it really means to be a follower of Christ. That is the mission that you and I are on. Love God. We have trouble loving God, yeah. 1 John 4:19 says we love him because he first loved us. We have trouble loving God, and I think it's because we have trouble. We don't grasp the true nature of God. Many of us see God as a stern judge who's up there and just waiting for us to pounce, for us to step out of line so he can pounce on us. And he's got a giant fly swatter, and anytime one of us is out of the way, he just whacks. But that's not God at all. Read the scriptures. But if your understanding of God is not in line with who God really is, you're not going to love him. You're not going to love a tyrant. You're not going to love someone who you can't trust. And oftentimes, the struggle that we have in our life with God is this truth of love, of trusting God. We tend, as human beings, to think we have a better handle on things than God does. And to let go and to say, God, I'm going to trust you. It's a hard thing to do. But folks, you can't love without trust. And you can't love God if you don't trust God. There's always going to be a wall, a barrier between you. You might do all the Christian things that you're supposed to do. Everyone might look at you and say, what a great follower of Jesus Christ. What a great Christian that person is. But if there is this distrust in your heart between you and God, then you're missing out on what it is to really love God. You can't love God and not trust God at the same time. They go hand in hand. Love and trust. And you can't, if you have a flawed view of who God is, then you're not going to love God. Oswald Chambers wrote, if we try to prove to God how much we love him, it is a sure sign that we really don't love him. The evidence of our love for him is the absolute spontaneity of our love, which flows naturally from his nature within us. And when we look back, we will not be able to determine why we did certain things, but we can know that we did them according to the spontaneous nature of his love in us. Spontaneous acts of love to God, whether it's helping somebody because you love God, whether it's just stopping your car and belting out a song of worship, whether it's just looking up in the sky and saying, God! Spontaneous acts of love. That's what Oswald Chambers is talking about. Folks, what I'm saying to you is, don't settle in this life of being a follower of Jesus Christ for anything less than loving God. You're missing the boat. Church, Christian music, you've heard me say this, Christian t-shirts, Christian books, Christian fiction books, Bible studies, podcasts, all those things have their place, but none of them are a substitute for genuinely loving God. And when you genuinely love God, all those other things take second place in a heartbeat. There is no substitute for a heart that is so connected and so warm in your relationship with God. That's what the cross is about. The cross isn't just about heaven. The cross isn't just about forgiveness of sin. The cross is about loving God and making a way for you and I to be able to love him. We're going to turn to communion. But let me, Francis Xavier wrote this, and as I share this poem, if we could just get ready for communion, please. My God, I love thee, not because I hope for heaven thereby, nor yet because who love thee are not lost eternally. Thou, O my Jesus, thou didst me upon the cross embrace. For me didst bear the nails and spear and manifold disgrace, and griefs and torments numberless, and sweat of agony, yea, death itself, and all for me who was thine enemy. Then why, O blessed Jesus Christ, should I not love thee well? Not for the sake of winning heaven, nor of escaping hell, not from the hope of gaining aught, not seeking a reward, but as thyself has loved me, O ever-loving Lord. So I would love thee, dearest Lord, and in thy praise will sing, solely because thou art my God and my most loving King. Loving God, folks. Let's have communion, please.